Hello, and my name is Ron Williams. I am the CEO of Talon Companies here in Orange County, California. I'm also a retired U.S. Secret Service agent. I spent 22 years in the agency, and when I left, I started my own company called Talon Companies. And under the Talon Companies umbrella are three companies: Talon Executive Services, Talon Cyber Tech for cybersecurity, and Secure Strategies International, which is a consulting company for security for critical infrastructure, doing security risk assessments and emergency response plans. Today, I want to talk about executive protection. That's sort of our forte under the Talon Executive Services Company. And my mantra is, don't be a sheep, be a lion. And so with that, I want to start by just telling you there's a big difference between U.S. Secret Service protection and executive protection for high net worth people. I learned that right away when I started my business in the private sector. In the Secret Service, there are some similarities, but there's also a lot of differences in executive protection in the private sector and Secret Service, but some things remain constant. One of the things that remains constant is what I call, and what the Secret Service calls, is this three circles of security: the outer perimeter, which is usually defined by an outer perimeter fence, fence line, property line, curtilage line. That's where security starts, at the curtilage line where your property starts. The middle perimeter usually is parking lots or lawns, and you use environmental protection by design for the middle perimeter. The inner perimeter, obviously, is the inside of a facility, or if you're talking in terms of personal protection, it's up close and personal. Those three things remain constant when you're talking about Secret Service or executive protection for high net worth individuals. The real difference comes in the fact that the Secret Service has sufficient manpower, technology, training, and equipment to provide a secure environment for the President or Vice President of the United States and also foreign heads of state. What I learned when I first left the Secret Service, I ran the Presidential Protection Division for Secret Service in Los Angeles for 4 years. And we had numerous presidential visits, vice presidential, but we had a plethora of foreign heads of state, which a lot of people don't realize, that we protect any foreign head of state that comes into the United States. And so there are some things that remain constant, but I found out when I left the Secret Service that executive protection can be very, very different. It still requires contacts worldwide, and executive protection is still based on a threat assessment, meaning that when you sign a contract with a client to provide executive protection, there are certain things that have to be done prior to just establishing a protective ring. And that is that you have to be concerned with the three circles of protection. I want to talk about a case study real quick to give you an example of why it's important to develop contacts nationwide and worldwide. We had a client that was down in Mexico and taking a cruise, and his wife got really sick, and they had to disembark on the ship in Mexico, but they wanted to get back to the United States. The only way to really guarantee passage is with our contacts in Mexico. A former Secret Service agent owned a security company in Mexico that assisted us. We sent two of our agents down to Mexico to escort them back with the assistance of the security company in Mexico City. Another example of needing worldwide contacts, I had a client that was traveling and went to Paris, France. And outside of the hotel that she and her daughter were staying, there was a huge demonstration. And she became very frightened and scared. Her husband called me at about 10 o'clock at night. I put in a call to our affiliate in Paris, and in 30 minutes, he had two armed officers at their hotel door. That's important. And why that's important is you have to have those kind of contacts that you can call on worldwide. The issue of executive protection comes down to being very personal, and therefore you have to do certain things as a requirement to be effective in executive personal protection. Next slide. When you sign a contract to provide executive protection for a person of high net worth, you have to consider his family, his or her family, in context of overall protection. Usually, people of high net worth are real concerned about the safety and security of their children. And so personal protection requires a security awareness training of all the members of the family. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. We'll talk about security awareness training. You have to do a physical and cyber security risk assessment of the home and residence of the executive, keeping in mind the three circles of security concern: the outer perimeter, the middle perimeter, and the inner perimeter. When you are looking at security, let's say for an estate, do you have a checkpoint where vendors, contractors, visitors can come through and be checked and verified and vetted? If not, and your curtilage line or property line is not defined, it allows for easy access to the middle and inner perimeter. So when we talk about estate security, it requires a total security risk assessment, which means you have to assess the electronic portion of the security. Are there sufficient cameras Do they operate on tilt, pan, zoom? Are they stationary cameras? Where are they monitored? Is it monitored 24/7 by a security person? Because I am a firm believer in technology when it comes to executive protection. Usually, if there's a failure in any executive protection plan, it's at the human level. But if you have sufficient technology, for instance, not only cameras, but alarms built on the fence line, touch pads, microwave. These are all expensive items, but infrared along the fence line is not that expensive. You can build your security starting at the curtilage line, at the property line, by defining how you're going to control influx and of people coming onto the property. The middle perimeter is something that you have to look at for environmental protection by design, meaning that you might take a look at how you can use shrubbery, trees, etc., to protect the middle perimeter from having somebody intrude with a car or ramming through the gate, etc., etc. You need pillars of protection in the middle perimeter, and usually that's by security by environmental design. The inner perimeter obviously demands an effective alarm system that can be transmitted via cell phone if you're out. But it also is incumbent to provide a safe room in the executive home, wherein if somebody does intrude onto the property, the protectees can get into the safe room and lock the door, a metal door, and be protected in the event that the perpetrators are able to get into the interior of the estate. Now, the issue with the executive protection agent, the training of Secret Service agents is entirely different than the training for police officers. Police officers are trained to respond to the perpetrator and take action against the person that is intruding. Secret Service training demands that if the intruder gets onto the property, the protection agent goes immediately to the family to cover and evacuate. There's a difference between the responses, and therefore, when you hire people who are going to be protection agents, you have to drill it into their mind the difference in response, an emergency response. And the emergency response is always to cover and evacuate. You can only take action against the perpetrator if that perpetrator gets into the interior and is a threat to the executive and his family. Otherwise, your job is to make sure that they are in a safe and secure environment in the event of a perpetrator or perpetrators entering the property. When you do a security risk assessment, you have to take all of these matters into concern, and you not only assess the residence and the home of the business executive, but you also have to go to his place where he runs a business or a company to do an examination of that business to see how you can protect him or her from a potential disgruntled employee or a terminated employee. And I give you an example of what occurred Washington, D.C. in 2015. A man by the name of Sava Sopopoulos, his wife, their son Philip, and their housekeeper were all tortured and murdered in their estate. A gentleman by the name of, I use that term loosely, gentleman, but the perpetrator was a man named Darian Went. And Darian was a former employee of Mr. Savopoulos at the American Iron Works, which was a very successful company in Maryland. They lived in the northwest part of Washington, D.C. in the Georgetown area, which is a highly influential area. And they probably thought they were secure in their environment because there were multi-million-dollar homes and estates around them. But this person showed up with pizzas like he was a pizza delivery man, got through the front door and held the family hostage, and over a 2-day period of time tortured and murdered the father, the mother, the son, and the housekeeper. That was a tragedy that could have been averted had proper protocols and policies be in place, which leads to another issue, and that is after you do the assessment of the home, you do the assessment of the office, it's incumbent on doing a hospital survey to note how far the hospital is, trauma centers. If there's any medical issues by anybody in the family, you have to take note of that. You also need to extract some DNA from each member of the family, hair follicles, et cetera, et cetera. I know that it's highly personal, but if you have established the right rapport with the executive and their family, they'll understand the need for you having some of their DNA. Obviously, with children, you have to be really concerned about kidnap and ransom. There are multiple case studies of children of high net worth individuals being kidnapped. The problem in our society today is that it's going to get worse, and the demand for executive protection agents right now is at a very high level because crime is spiking. And so we have to be very cognizant about the threats, and threat assessment is the main point of executive protection as well as any other kind of protection. It's measuring threats and risk to mitigate against those threats and risk. In other words, is your person that you are protecting and their family, are they well known? Do they have a lot of publicity? Have they engendered a lot of animosity from terminated employees? Are they targets because of their religious belief or their ethnicity? Those are all things that come into a threat assessment uh, when you are designing a protection plan for an executive and their family. The other is to establish great lines of communication with the family. Frequently, clients that are high net worth people have a chief of staff or somebody else for you to report to. I find that that's a very cumbersome relationship. You need access to the executive at all times, and you need to establish a rapport and a close working relationship. Protection is only effective if the executive and their family know your purpose and reason for being there. You're not there as servants and to clean up dog poop. You're there to protect them. And so, therefore, it's incumbent on establishing a real good rapport and relationship. Besides doing a home and business security risk assessment, also a hospital survey, especially if one of the members of the family has a illness that or a disease or a problem with their health. You need to know exactly where and when you're going to take that person to the hospital and be prepared to set up shop or protection at the hospital. And so, therefore, it requires a meeting with a security director of a hospital and also hospital personnel for them to understand what your needs will be if there's a prolonged hospital visit and stay. The other issue is protecting an executive in travel status. And this is where your contacts worldwide, nationwide come into play. It's incumbent to have those kind of contacts. It's also a requirement for you to consider a membership with OSAC, the Overseas Advisory Council on the State Department. They have a website. They provide travel guidelines. But we also employ our relationship with Stratfor for intelligence to tell us in certain areas where we might be going what the status and situation is. And again, it's incumbent on the having established relationships worldwide that you can call and ask specifically what's going on in the country. What do you see as the risk? What are the threats? Is there a terrorist type of threat? And prepare for mitigation of those kind of threats. The issue of emergency response planning is very, very important when you are engaged in an executive protection capacity. You have to prepare for every type of situation, and that demands an emergency response plan as it relates not only to a perpetrator or perpetrators coming after the executive and the family, kidnap and ransom, et cetera, but you have to prepare for fires, earthquakes, floods, any type of emergency that would demand a response. Not every response or not every emergency response plan is going to be exactly the same, but it has to incorporate those items of what you're going to do in certain situations. That's where tabletop exercises come into play. That's where you prepare emergencies based on security by design, meaning you design a threat and then decide how you're going to mitigate against that threat. When I attended Secret Service school for 1 or 2 days, we were asked to do a design basis threat analysis, meaning if I were going to attack the White House, how would I go about doing that? And then, based on the design basis threat, you design an emergency response on how you're going to mitigate against that threat. And so that's what is really important when you're doing an emergency response plan, is taking all of these situations into account. The added issue is kidnap and ransom. How are you going to handle something like that if it happens? And do you have a plan for extraction? So there's a lot more that goes into protecting a person of high net worth than just bodyguards. And that brings us to what kind of agent do you want to hire? And I recall getting a call from a Hollywood star, and their first question was, "How big are your guys? I'm looking for some really big, intimidating guys." And my response to that was, "We have people that we have trained in executive protection that aren't really relegated to a size of the person, because there's a very different feel about a person who's a quote bodyguard and somebody who is a protective executive protection agent. And that is that an executive protection agent has taken all of these factors: security awareness, risk assessment, threat assessment, and analyzed them and followed policies and procedures so that the executive and his family don't get into a situation where they are confronted with a threat. Bodyguards are fine, but if they're ill trained and they don't have the training in security awareness, they don't have training in security risk vulnerability assessments, then you're missing the boat with the kind of executive protection agent that is needed to protect a life. It's incumbent on not the size of the person, but the knowledge and the way they use that knowledge and good old brain power and common sense. When you devise after you have devised a risk assessment of the home, the business, the hospital, the travel, all of that, it's important to have a protocol and procedures, security, post orders for the agents to follow. And that provides the structure for an executive protection plan. The last thing I want to cover is security awareness. Security awareness, and again, I go back to my Secret Service days of training, but it's a very simple and non-complex plan for security awareness, and that's based on the light system. In other words, Green light is where your behaviors are not attuned to any threats or anything else. Is when you're in your home, you should feel secure, and your senses are relaxed. When you step out of your house, you're in a yellow light situation. You're in familiar territory, and but it's incumbent to look around and know your surroundings. My wife still thinks I'm paranoid because when I go out to get the paper in the morning, I look up and down the street to see if there's any unusual vehicles like a van sitting on the street, et cetera, et cetera. I'm looking for anything that's out of place. That's a yellow light concept. You're in familiar territory, but you want to know what your surroundings are. When you're in unfamiliar areas, you should be in a red light mode, and that is you should be cognizant of everything around you, people around you, events that occur around you, using your mind as a camera to take a picture of what's going on. If you see a perpetrator engaged in a crime, take a snapshot with your mind and size them up according to your height and weight. You can pretty well come close to measuring how tall and how much a person weighs by comparing them to your own weight and height. So, and when you profile behaviors, you have to also provide that in a security awareness program for the executive and the family to look for aberrant dysfunctional behaviors of vendors or people coming on property, any unusual behaviors. And incumbent also in the security awareness program is a kidnap and ransom mindset and developing a mental mindset to survive a kidnapping. So today we covered a lot of territory. I think that executive protection, it has a lot more entities than most people think, and it's a growing industry because unfortunately we live in a very difficult time of terrorism and crime spike, and we're seeing some very aberrant dysfunctional behaviors out there in the workplace. So thank you for your attention, and till next time, don't be a sheep, be a lion.